Welcome to episode 59 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tachek.
Today we're tackling a couple of buzzwords, blockchain and Bitcoin. Not unlike HTTPS and botnets, blockchain and Bitcoin are terms that are starting to seep into everyday use. But before we all start using them, we should figure out what they mean and how they work. This was actually a friend of mine, guys, who said, this is a topic that I would love to hear you hit. Because blockchain especially is turning into a bit of a, maybe it's not quite a security buzzword yet, but I've been hearing a lot lately about blockchain and how secure it is in storing information and accessing information. And I just don't even know what it is or how to define it. So let's start with that. What is blockchain?
Well, one way to think of a blockchain is kind of a decentralized ledger book. It is a thing that keeps track of transactions. So if you were to, in the example of Bitcoin, if you were to pay somebody, your transaction record would go into the blockchain, and that is spread across all sorts of computers all over the world. And those computers will see that transaction and they'll essentially confirm it. They'll say, okay, yes, Ken paid Nick 1 Bitcoin. Here's the transaction record. We saw it happen. It's legitimate. And when you have enough of the different decentralized parts of the network of the blockchain say, okay, yes, this transaction happened, it's essentially approved and it goes through. And so it's a way to keep track of something that happened, in this case, a payment with Bitcoin. And it is immutable after the fact, so you can't go and fudge the books later on. It's a way to kind of validate the transaction in the first place, and then to later on you can see essentially the path that Bitcoin took, where it went through the system.
You can see all the history.
Exactly.
See, what's weird is there doesn't seem to be a dumb terminal in this whole thing. One of the definitions that I read getting ready for this show was basically that blockchain is made up of nodes, and each node is an administrator in the blockchain. So it's not like you can just go keep an eye on it. It's like everybody who is part of it can also affect it.
Yes, to an extent, but the way it works with being decentralized is it's not giving any one node more power over another one. So you can't just participate in it and, I guess, modify your copy of the blockchain that's on your computer and say, oh, hey, that Ken really sent Nick 2 Bitcoins, not 1. All of the other nodes, so all the other computers are participating in the network, would say, no, it was 1, it's not 2. And they'll say, no, your fudged numbers aren't right, and it will basically ignore them. It's not legitimate. So by not giving anybody with any single node more power than any other node, and with everybody participating in it who's using the network, it's a way of making sure that those transactions are legitimate, and basically not allowing somebody to have complete control over the record book by themselves and say, oh yeah, this is really how much is in this account, and just make up numbers. It's just not possible with the way the technology works.
Now, obviously, okay, so as I mentioned a moment ago, one of the things that I read up on a little bit was nodes. I mean, that's what makes up this distributed network. What I don't know, and I'm wondering if you do, who owns the nodes? Or when you say, like you said a moment ago, it's on all kinds of computers. I'm assuming that does not mean my 13-inch MacBook Air could not be part of, wouldn't be a node necessarily, although obviously I still have to be able to affect things in a blockchain environment. I mean, where are these computers? Who owns these computers? Could you, as a just a guy, end up owning a computer that's, help me with the node part. Is even that just distributed computing as well? I mean, is there actually a physical node? Could I point at a machine and say that's part of it? Or is it so distributed that there are a bunch of computers that each hold a tiny piece?
No, you could point at it. It's essentially being a node participant is meaning you're essentially also mining Bitcoin. You are
Okay.
when you're connected, it's usually an application running on either a computer or a piece of hardware, and it's participating in the network. It's doing some calculations with cryptography, and so you could point and say this computer is a node because you're running the software that is mining Bitcoins or whatever other cryptocurrency. So by participating in the mining process, you're also participating in the block, essentially validating the blockchain itself. And so you can download the software yourself. Actually, sometimes the bad guys do that on your computer when you don't know. A lot of malware out there will actually run a cryptocurrency mining program in the background. So it's using your computer's power and computing cycles and everything else to mine cryptocurrency and send it off to the bad guy's address, and you have no idea what's going on in your computer. So that has happened in the past. Recently, there's been some stuff in the news where ads that were appearing on websites were running a mini
Showtime
cryptocurrency mining program. Essentially, I think it was with Java in the background. Essentially, it was running this mining thing whenever the ad was visible on somebody's computer, and that would be a really slow way of mining Bitcoins, I suppose. But the speed.
But if you're a network like Showtime, you're gonna have everybody streaming from the website, and so basically those small little fractions of it all add up.
Right. It's like, this is so horrible that I can actually say this, but it's like in Superman 3, when the Richard Pryor character figured out that there were fractions of pennies being lost in transactions or being moved in transactions. And so he was able to put them all together. And of course he got super rich, and then he was found out by Superman. And I think, well, it was Richard Pryor, so it ended up being okay for him in the movie. But point being, I mean, even though you're talking about teeny tiny bits of Bitcoin, if you've got so many people, the way Showtime would have had access to, or did have access to, or does have access to, then even if it's an incredibly slow way to do it, if they're only making the smallest bit, you put all those bits together and eventually you've got a bit more. There's a weird thing. The part that gets confusing to me is, well, there's almost like a chicken or egg thing going on, it seems like. I found this tie-in between blockchain and cryptocurrency interesting. Nodes are said to be mining Bitcoin, as you just said, but the term is something of a misnomer. And this is from the website blockgeeks.com. Nodes are said to be mining Bitcoin, but the term is something of a misnomer. In fact, each one is competing to win Bitcoins by solving computational puzzles. Bitcoin was the raison d'etre for the blockchain as it was originally conceived. It's now recognized to be only the first of many potential applications of the technology. Okay, what's weird to me about that is, so basically somebody had an idea for a currency and said, okay, well, how are we going to keep it safe? And it almost feels like that should be the other way around. Like, I guess what I'm wondering is, when you look past the Bitcoin part of it, is there a particular type of information that seems best suited to blockchain, or vice versa? I mean, are we talking, personal information? Are we talking corporate information? Are we talking medical information? Is there one particular thing, or is it always going to be cryptocurrency with a side of other, information that might be able to ride along?
There are some applications of blockchain that people have been exploring with regards to a decentralized way to store information. So, computer files or whatever. And yes, technically something like personal information or corporate info, you're essentially, if your computer files could be backed up over the entire internet, and everybody would there'd be little pieces of them everywhere, but nobody would have the whole file, and you'd have the key to unlock your own files. Technically, that is a potential application for it, but one application that's much more, obvious in a way, would be any sort of thing that needs to have a record of what happened. So the record of what happened that is immutable, that can't be changed after the fact. So the very first thing that comes to mind is voting. You could record, using blockchain technology, you could vote on whatever you're voting for. And then after the fact, after the vote is over, all the votes would be essentially validated that they actually were correct and occurred. You could validate your own vote, making sure that your candidate wasn't switched with somebody else's, and it basically couldn't be changed. So it would provide a level of security and decentralization there, which has some pretty amazing potential.
Yeah, that's an awesome idea. A lot of companies, this is like one of those terms or technology that people are looking at going, wait, so how can we utilize this? How can we integrate this into our products? How can we take advantage of this technology? And lots of companies are looking at blockchain, just technology-wise. How can they implement it?
And if you think about it, if you look at something like the origins of peer-to-peer networking, back in the day with Napster, it was, hey, let's all pirate a bunch of music. And the technology has since...
I think the term we want to use is share.
Share a bunch of music. Yes. I just don't let Metallica know. Basically, the technology started out as something to do one thing, and it has since morphed into something that is used every day. I mean, you look at Spotify. It works by essentially turning your computer into a peer-to-peer music sharing service that's legitimate. That is, basically you pay them a subscription fee, or you listen to their ads. And while you're listening to music while the client's running, it's also streaming bits and pieces of songs to other people kind of near you, network-wise. And
which a lot of people may not realize.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of other. I mean, there's a lot of other technology like that where essentially peer-to-peer networking, for large file distribution. All sorts of things that it wasn't necessarily the original concept, and it's kind of morphed into these different fields. And the blockchain has the same potential there, where right now it's mostly being used for cryptocurrency, but it has all these applications and possibilities beyond that.
I want to get to cryptocurrency a bit more in a second, but can we go back really quickly to when you say companies are trying to figure out how they can implement or how they can use blockchain technology? What I'm wondering is, everything that I had read said, okay, so if you're part of blockchain, you download a thing and you get a thing, and blockchain is updated across all of the nodes every 10 minutes, I think one of the things that I read said. And I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, if everybody was into this, would those nodes not then become overloaded? I mean, what is it that, like peer-to-peer networking, it was, I had a computer, I turned on my computer, I opened up part of it to this thing. Other people did the same. Who's footing the bill for these nodes? How are they happening? Is this just like universities? Is it private corporations? Is it just some guy with a lot of computing power? I mean, like what is this supported on now? And if suddenly the whole world was like, yeah, blockchain, what would have to happen to keep the whole thing from buckling?
It wouldn't necessarily buckle. The more people you have participating in a peer-to-peer network, the more efficient it is. As far as the expense goes, yes, if you're running the software on your home computer, you're paying your electricity, you're paying your ISP for your internet access, you paid for the computer, you are paying in some ways. And to be honest, most home computers are not efficient enough to be worthwhile to mine cryptocurrency, at least not Bitcoin, because it gets exponentially harder to mine a new crypto coin the longer the crypto coins have been mined for. So with Bitcoin, there's a hard cap on the number of coins that are ever going to be able to be mined. And as each coin is mined, the next one is slightly harder to mine. And so it kind of goes up exponentially. And people found quickly that different hardware was better suited for mining, and actually it turned out that graphic cards, so things that you'd normally think of as, how do I play that really awesome new video game, and have it look wonderful, it turned out graphic cards were really good at doing the calculations required to mine Bitcoin. So there are whole farms of mining rigs that are essentially a case with graphic cards in them that are specific software to run the mining software and use those graphics cards to mine it. And there are warehouses full of those, especially over in China. Is a big area where that's been happening. And so but in the case of blockchain, the more people, more participants that are working towards it, it's just going to be making things more smooth, and it'll make transactions verify more quickly because there are more people participating. So in that sense, anybody can run it. You are going to have to foot the bill for your power usage is the main expense involved when you're doing any sort of heavy amount of mining.
See, I was assuming that you would actually need something that's sort of like workstation level. I mean, that because what you're talking about is like if you, Nick, wanted to do that, or if I, Ken, wanted us to do that, I mean, then we're talking about our own computing power. But as Mr. Rabba said a moment ago, there are lots of companies that are trying to figure out how to sort of use this as well. I'm assuming that their usage would be exponentially larger than mine would be. But are they still relying on my computer and your computer, or are they actually going to have to like put in for infrastructure?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Nick. I think what he was saying was the technology underlying blockchain with regards to a transaction ledger and behavior, not necessarily for mining cryptocurrency, for other applications that it could be used for.
And there's not just one blockchain. It's not like the one internet. Any company could set up their own infrastructure with it. So there's Bitcoin. There's other cryptocurrencies. There's smaller ones. There's ones that are, catching up with Bitcoin.
Wait, hold on. Go back, because there are several kinds of cryptocurrency. I know that, but there is one Bitcoin. I mean, so you're saying
Bitcoin is a type of cryptocurrency.
I understand that. What I want to go back, though, to is blockchain. So
Yes.
So you're saying there's not one blockchain in the same way that there is an internet? Because I was starting to get the impression that blockchain was a series of nodes. What you're saying is a blockchain is a series of nodes.
Yes. And everybody participating in a blockchain actually has a copy of the entire blockchain on their computer. And it's just that when you have the nodes, they're able to perform the validation of the transactions that occurred. So if you want to think of it as the blockchain itself is a technology. Anybody could take the source code, essentially source code for blockchain, and say that's actually what happened when you had some of the other cryptocurrencies come out. They said, oh, it's getting too hard and it takes too long to mine a Bitcoin. I want to make something that's easier to mine so I can get a bunch of cryptocurrency and hope it takes off. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So you had people who just would take the underlying technology. Other people didn't like the hard cap on the number of Bitcoins. They wanted a higher ceiling. They wanted double the number that could be mined. So they just essentially forked the technology, the blockchain technology, made their own changes, and then you just try and get people to start using your version. But anybody could take that underlying technology and essentially make their own spin-off of it that utilizes it. It's just a matter of you'd have to have people install your client software or whatever you're going to use to connect to those, essentially for the nodes to find each other over the internet. But it's just it can be used in very different ways, and it's not the same blockchain being used for Bitcoin as is being used for Ethereum. It's different blockchains.
Think of it as like a network. Like you join your work network or the library network or whatever it may be, and while you're part of that network, you're part of the network, and you're just part of that selection. If you were to join another blockchain or cryptocurrency, that's its own little network right there. So whichever one you're participating in, you're just a part of that one. But anybody could set up their own.
Here's another way to think of it. It would be a different banks and their branches. So you have Wells Fargo, and all of the Wells Fargo branches know essentially the transactions within their network. They can look up your checking account information. They can look up your credit card history. But then you have Bank of America, and they have their own ledger book that's separate from Wells Fargo, and they can't look at Wells Fargo's ledger book because they're two separate. You'd have different bank accounts, one with each bank. So it's the same type of thing, a ledger book, record of your transactions, but the banks are separate. So in that regard, there can be, if you think of blockchain as Wells Fargo's ledger book and Bank of America's ledger book, there can be different implementations of the same type of technology.
Okay, where this is all starting to break down for me a tiny bit, and I wasn't coming at this to poke holes in it, but I was kind of more excited when I thought that there was one blockchain. The reason being, if it's like a completely, distributed worldwide, but it's one thing, on the one hand, that sort of seems like centralization because that provides a point of breakdown. If somebody is able to subvert the whole thing, then it can go under. But at the same time, let's say we're dealing with two blockchains, and this one is about, keeping track of votes, let's say. And then there's another one that's also in charge of keeping track of votes, but they don't talk to each other, and so one of them may be different than the other. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, like when you talk about B of A and I can't remember the other one that you said, Wells Fargo. I mean, they're both dealing with, I kind of want to call it hard currency, although, we can actually get into whether money is a real thing or not. But I mean, they're dealing with the same kind of currency, right? And so, I mean, no, their networks can't necessarily talk to each other, although they do. I guess they must be able to shake hands in some way. But while their networks aren't talking to each other, they're speaking the same language. I mean, they have this one thing that they're dealing with. And so when you're saying that actually not only are the platforms distributed, but then also, I mean, they're completely different, then I'm wondering what it is that actually... It's almost like Wikipedia in a way. I mean, the thing that was supposed to keep Wikipedia honest was the fact that everybody could go in and change it, or everybody could go in and edit it. And so if you're saying, well, there's a blockchain for this and there's a blockchain for that, then I don't know that what keeps one honest as opposed to the other, unless we're relying on the honesty of all the people involved.
Yeah, exactly. When you're talking about different ones for different things, for votes, for example. If you were going to be using it for your country's voting system, you would want one blockchain for everybody. All of your citizens would be using the same blockchain. If when you wouldn't want a situation where you'd be concerned that one blockchain was different from another, with both being used in equal measure. If that makes sense. Like if there's Wikipedia, for example, you have what you said. You rely on all the contributors to essentially keep the entries honest, and you'll see the occasional typo or vandalism occur on a Wikipedia page. And usually, if it's a high traffic page, it will be quickly discovered and fixed. What happens with blockchain is it's kind of like it doesn't require a person to be reading the page and say, oh, hey, somebody vandalized this page and this isn't real and they snuck in some fake info. It's all the other nodes that are participating are able to essentially agree with themselves and say, oh, hey, no, this other guy is totally wrong. We're just going to ignore that completely. It will never even be posted to the Wikipedia page for the public to see. It never gets to that step. There'd be a threshold where if you corrupted enough nodes somehow, that you could force a change in the blockchain. Yeah, if you had enough. Well, I mean, then there's the math and the crypto involved too. So it'd be a massive undertaking.
Right. Hold on one second, because that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, doesn't that just involve how good my key is? Because here's the thing. If I've got access to go in and edit this information on a given blockchain, I mean, you say the other node's going to look at it and go, oh, I'm not so sure. I mean, that's only true if I've hacked, right? Because if I've got a key that gets me in to change things, then it's like Animal Farm. I could go in and, yesterday it said 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And then today it says 4 legs good, 2 legs better, because I had the proper key to go in and change the writing on the wall. Because if all of these nodes are looking at each other and going, okay, my most recent one says this, do they not all change accordingly? I mean, because there's not a person actually going in and checking every change.
No, here's the thing, though. Your key is mainly used to spend your Bitcoin. It's used to send your Bitcoin to a different address. It's not used to make a change in the blockchain, which is essentially is a chunk of data. The blockchain itself, each block is tied to the block before it. So it's validating the previous transaction and it's providing the next step that would be used for mine. It's not
right. If you're talking about money, I mean, if you're talking about cryptocurrency, that's true, right? But then if you're talking about other kinds of information that we might be able to store,
it would still have to be because everything references essentially the previous and the next thing in the chain in the blockchain. Mm-hmm. It's if you tried to break that, it just wouldn't. Because you have other people who are also or other nodes participating. They all say, hey, our mathematical calculations are showing this, and it's us against, it's however many against one vote. It's complex, obviously.
Well, it is. I mean, I guess the part that I'm trying to figure out, and help me, can you go with me conceptually and tell me, because obviously Bitcoin was created in 2008. And so they've kind of got the how do we count the money thing down, right? Because it's money. And people tend to really be very secure about how they deal with, perceived value, let's say. Whether or not you can actually call it money, I don't know. But their perceived value of that. What I'm wondering about is when we hear that people are looking at this thing that was set up to protect currency and saying, man, there are lots of other things that we could do as well. What I'm trying to figure out is what guards the validity of that information. Because, I mean, when you're talking about currency, you're talking about addition and subtraction. And that's a fairly easy thing to check. When you're talking about other information, I'm not even concerned about how to keep it safe, because I know, there are the same keys that you use to keep the money safe ought to work for any other information. But once I've got a key and I can go in and change it, and I don't mean like just, send information to someone else, but actually go in and change what is being said, change the info. I mean, do you see what I'm saying at that point?
Yeah, no, but I just want to clarify that the key is used to make a transaction. Be it in the case of money, it'd be sending money to a different address. In the case of a different application, obviously, it would be used for different things like verifying that your key would be used to cast your vote.
Right.
So your key isn't used to, your key is used to do something. It's to cast a vote. Once that vote has been cast, changing the data would be like you went into a ledger and tried to erase a number and change it. It's not, the key doesn't really factor into that, is what I'm trying to say. It's you're relying on a number, it's relying on enough legitimate nodes in the system to verify the legitimacy of the transaction, essentially.
Okay, so then it begins to sound to me as if, and I'm not, I'm really not trying to be obtuse. I just am. You're talking about things that are transactional. You're talking about things that are, votes. So, on, off, yes, no, 1, 0. Or you're talking about addition and subtraction. I have a Bitcoin. I want to give you 1/8 of a Bitcoin. This thing's going to figure out how to do that. If we're talking about things like medical records, if we're talking about things like, other kinds of information besides something that's purely transactional, I'm trying to figure out what the checks on that would be. Or am I wrong in thinking that that's the kind of thing that blockchain could be used for?
I think that that's probably going to be the problem that some of these companies are trying to solve currently. I don't think you'd be using the blockchain technology to straight up send your medical data or store your medical data. It would be
like Nick said, they're trying to figure out how they could utilize this technology in their environment. Whether you're a car manufacturer or you're a hospital trying to figure out how to store data to make sure that the data isn't manipulated by somebody else. Just the idea behind the distribution behind blockchain, I think, is what everybody's trying to figure out. How can we utilize this in our environment if there's even a good role? And I think as more and more companies start playing with the technology and roll out their own instances for it, other companies will be like, well, wait, if they're using it in this fashion, then maybe we could use it in this fashion. We talked about money, we talked about music, where else can you utilize the technology and rely on the multiple node fashion of it?
And I think for right now, it's essentially, it's being used in certain situations, and there are applications that it could be used for, but it's still very much work in progress. I'm not aware of anybody who's using it to currently store medical records. It's a problem that people are working on to see if it'll work.
All right. So then going back to the very beginning, if the question is blockchain, and I'm not trying to be a wise guy here, if the question is what is blockchain, the answer is it's a really neat idea that may have many applications.
That's pretty accurate.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent.
We're going to find universities and a lot of minds working at it together. I mean,
yeah,
you're gonna hear about new projects coming out of different labs where it actually utilizes this technology, and that's where you're going to see more and more people going, wait, maybe we could use this for our stuff. Maybe it could fix this problem that we had. I think that's where you're going to see a lot of it.
So we've talked a lot about blockchain, but I don't want to gloss over the parts about Bitcoin. What do I need to know?
So, Ken, have you actually mined anything, done any Bitcoins, anything like that yet?
No, I have not. Oh, I like that
set
you
up
say
your
yet,
wallet?
though. But no. You're thinking I should, though, apparently.
Yeah, it's easy to do, and people who actually did get in on the early mining have a bit of Bitcoin in wallets. And Bitcoin is what today valued at $4,100 a Bitcoin.
That's something we didn't get into earlier. It was how you're storing your own Bitcoins, and there are services now that can store your Bitcoins in an online wallet for you. They promise to keep them safe and secure, and sometimes they get hacked and you lose all your Bitcoins. But one way to do it is you can actually have essentially a file on your computer that is your little wallet that holds your Bitcoin addresses and the keys that you can use to spend them. And it's up to you to keep that secure. And the funny thing is, back when Bitcoin first started, I think like the first Bitcoin transaction was 25 Bitcoins for pizza. And I'm sure that guy is kicking himself now. Maybe I think it had to be more than 25 Bitcoins. Anyway, but the point is that a lot of times back then it was, it didn't have any real value to people. So they were like, oh, this is kind of cool technology. I'm going to try it out. And then they get a new computer, because back then you could mine Bitcoins on ancient hardware. It didn't require anything special. You could get them like candy. Mm-hmm. So they get a new computer and they forget about it, and their hard drive goes in their closet, or goes to Goodwill, or goes to the dump. And there is a little wallet file sitting on that computer with Bitcoin in it. And if they, or you forget, or you lock down your wallet file with a password and you forgot the password, you've essentially locked yourself out of your bank account, your Bitcoin bank account with a lot of money. It's kind of funny because there are plenty of computers, I'm sure, forgotten in dusty corners that have quite a bit of virtual currency on them that people
even if it was a fraction of a Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Like you're like, wait, I didn't even get a whole Bitcoin. Screw this. I'm turning this off. But you had your fraction of the Bitcoin that you mined. That fraction of one Bitcoin, that fraction of $4,000 something right now, is still a nice chunk of change.
One example, actually, that I experienced personally was a few years ago. I had discovered a piece of malware that was stealing Bitcoins from people's computers, from Macs. And we, as a company, we got the news out and alerted Apple to it. And there were some people on Reddit who I had posted some information there about it, because that was originally where I had seen some references to it. People like, hey, I downloaded this program and I'm missing Bitcoins. And having solved the issue for them, being like, oh, well, it was this malware, and letting them know, some of them said, hey, can we tip you in Bitcoin? I was like, okay. And I had never used it. So I set up the wallet and had my little whatever fraction of Bitcoin they sent me. And I forgot about it. I mean, that was like 2014 or something like that. And it wasn't worth very much then at all. And then I went and looked at it, and my little tenth of a Bitcoin appreciated fairly significantly in value between 2014 and 2017. It was kind of one of those things where I went, okay, that's pretty cool. And then it made me think about all the people who have, those wallets they've forgotten about, like I did, on my computer. And it was just lucky that I still had my password for mine. But it's just something to think about, where technology has been around for a number of years now, and is now the cryptocurrency is worth quite a bit more than it used to be. it makes you wonder how many of those wallets are sitting out there that people have forgotten about.
This may be more like a philosophical question than a question that anybody can answer, but what's the actual value of a cryptocurrency?
Whatever you make it.
That makes no sense.
No,
so basically, I convince you that something has value, and so then it has value, and then if somebody else wants in on it because they see that we think it has value, suddenly the thing that we think has value has a bit more. But I'm trying to figure out, I mean, going back to what we said about, Washington Mutual and Bank of America, I mean, they're dealing with a currency that is being backed by a government, whereas Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are just kind of being backed by the idea of currency.
The idea of decentralized currency, decentralized semi-anonymous, and that the transactions are immutable, so you essentially can't fake things out. It's those things that make it valuable to some people, and then you have people who are offering physical goods or whatever else in payment for it. That gives it a larger value across more things. So I think that it does come down to who's valuing it for what purpose in the first place. And in that case, privacy advocates and decentralization advocates, I suppose. But beyond that, it takes a kind of a certain critical mass of other people who say, hey, this is worth this many hot dogs or whatever you want to trade your Bitcoin for. And I think it's an interesting kind of case study in economics, I suppose.
And like you said, Ken, this is a hot topic. I mean, you have executives at banks basically saying this is nothing. This is not worth anything. You have countries banning it as a whole, saying that they don't recognize it or they're not allowed to participate in it. But then you have the executives saying it's not worth anything, and then the price of Bitcoin drops because people get scared and they sell, and then those same banks or executives buy it up a whole bunch of it while it's at a low, and then suddenly it climbs back up, and maybe it's worth something.
The interesting thing is a lot of the banks are actually looking into the underlying technology with blockchain as potential uses for their own databases. Another aspect that Nick kind of just hit on there is that it's not regulated. I mean, some countries are trying to regulate it. China's especially been trying to crack down on it. I know the United States is sitting there going, huh. But right now it's not really regulated. I mean, yes, there can be different local laws for various countries, but it has these humongous fluctuations based on rumor, speculation, potential news, fake news, real news. It's kind of like the stock market in a way where some piece of news can really send the price diving or climbing, but because there's no real centralized oversight of the value of it. It's very I wouldn't say it's open to manipulation, but it's definitely an opportunity for some people are seeing it as an opportunity for essentially shorting it or what have you. So it's kind of like stock trading in a way with regards to the value when you're converting it to something like US dollars. But the core believers in the system who are valuing it more for that privacy aspect or whatever, it's kind of like two different types of values for the same currency. If that makes sense.
It's not so much that it's open to manipulation, but it is susceptible to whim.
Yeah, I'd say that's a much better way of explaining. I was kind of going, manipulation wasn't quite the right way, but yeah, it definitely.
I will tell you honestly, I started this show very excited. I don't know if you could hear it, but about halfway through, I got incredibly frustrated. and now I've gotten incredibly excited again because I thought there was some piece that I was missing. And it turns out, no, it's a piece that we're all missing because this is a direction that we're headed. And this is one of the reasons that I actually wanted to talk about this, not just because a friend of mine, suggested it, but because I knew that no matter how much I read about it, I felt like there was something there that I wasn't quite grasping. And it was the fact that we're still talking theoretical at this point, but it really is. I mean, it's a whole bunch of fascinating theories because when you start to read sites, I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but we will have them in the notes. Block Geeks was sort of like, there was one that I read that was almost like explaining it to a 5-year-old. In fact, I think it said it was explaining it to a 5-year-old. Blockgeeks.com actually had some really interesting information that was sort of, it didn't make me feel like a child, but at the same time it was very accessible. So maybe it's actually written for a child, and I just didn't realize. You might have figured out, though, we've barely scratched the surface in the discussion that we had today. So yes, that one I was talking about, blockgeeks.com. And then we're going to have other links to some of the sources that we used, other websites that you can check out at the show's website, securemac.com/checklist. That address again is securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question that you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit, we would love to hear it. The email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, do remember this. You are listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.